You can access the entire episode now on our website, forbiddenknowledge.news, Rokfin, Rumble, and all podcast platforms. How does this all connect somehow with the development of DARPA technologies and some of these very dark advanced technologies?
Well, I think ultimately, there were rumors for years that Lansdale had been involved in some of the behavioral modification programs. I looked far and wide for that. I saw some really interesting hints about that I get into in the book, but I wasn't able to really find something directly linking him. But I did come up with some really interesting ties that one of his close affiliates had, and that was General Edwin Black, who is himself a very colorful character. But Black, I found out from a declassified FBI document, had actually been a really significant figure in the early Project Bluebird. He was essentially overseeing the committee around this that later became the Artichoke Committee. And this was a guy who was essentially looking at these, they referred to the work they were doing as biological warfare, which is interesting, but they were looking at these methods essentially at the time to reconstruct personalities after a period of disassociation, and then also to implant false memories on people. So anyway, Black appears to have been active in this from way back, and later he became closely connected to Lansdale and a lot of his operations in the 60s involving psychological warfare. And this also played into some of what Lansdale was pushing through DARPA with Goodell. Because as I said before, they had the counterinsurgency program in DARPA. It was known as Project Agile. And the main guy who was overseeing it was Licklider, who was the major guy who launched the ARPANET. He's generally considered to be the father of the internet. It's not really talked about, but he was also overseeing counterinsurgency programs for DARPA on and off throughout the 60s and early 1970s. And initially, this was for Goodell and related to a lot of the stuff in the Phoenix program. And this went back to these model villages that I was talking about before, where they were doing predictive modeling. But this wasn't the only aspect of this. There were several other programs going on at the time. I believe the one in Vietnam was called ComCom, and then there was another one launched called Camelot, where they were taking data that was being compiled on various militaries in foreign countries that we were supposedly allied with, especially in South America. And they were using this to run predictive models on these militaries to see how the United States military would fare in a war against them, what we needed to shore up to wipe them out more effectively, that kind of thing. And interesting enough, the company behind both of these projects was known as Simulamatics, which is a fascinating company. It was used by John F. Kennedy in the 1960 election to essentially do an early version of what Cambridge Analytica was doing with targeted ads and stuff like that from data mining. Yes, this technology has actually existed all the way back then.
Yeah.
So, again, through Ellsberg and some other people, Lansdale had ties to the Simulamatics company. And then later, he seems to have been the whole milieu that was behind Project Camelot, or not Project Camelot, Project Cambridge. That was the one that came afterwards in the late 60s, early 70s, that was specifically using data mining and the ARPANET to do additional predictive models on social trends in the United States and so forth. So after looking at all of these different programs that Lansdale had been linked to, it seemed clear to me that he had been one of the early advocates to use predictive modeling to try and manage U.S. society. This was very much methods that he had developed while he was overseas, first in the Philippines and then later through Vietnam. And it seems like as time went on, they decided to use more and more of these programs domestically. And of course, this really became especially applicable after the rise of the internet in the 90s, with Google, with the search engine, which was really, I think, the first breakthrough for the ability to kind of covertly compile data on U.S. citizenry without their knowledge of it. but a lot of this went back essentially to early conceptions of how technology could be used to develop a more effective means of counterinsurgency. And I think that effectively this was sort of two aspects of what I think of as both a hard scientific approach to it, and then sort of a softer approach, or at least a less scientifically rigorous approach that was being conducted by MK Ultra and Artichoke. Because again, these methods were also applied through another organization that Lansdale was involved with, the Institute for American Strategy, which really created a lot of the John Bircher style disinformation, which really, I mean, gave birth to the whole InfoWars crowd around Alex Jones many years later. But, you know, in this case, they're using what Naomi Klein, I would say, you know, kind of thinks of as the shock doctrine, methods essentially developed by Artichoke and MK Ultra that could be applied through psychological warfare to the public on a whole. So this is one of the reasons why I became so fixated on Lansdale and doing this book, because it seemed clear to me that he was pretty much using everything at his disposal to come up with ways to engage in perception management of the US public. You know, they were using this sort of shock doctrine method at a grassroots level through things like the John Birch Society, later I think through some of the ufology circles. And then also you're developing these complex computer models that would later be used by companies like Google to come up with more rigorous personality profiling, both of individuals and then later of society as a whole. So there's some just very chilling implications for all of this, especially in light of what we've seen in the last 5 or 6 years.
If you had to speculate, how far advanced do you think the technology that our military-industrial complex and DARPA is in possession of compared to what the public is currently aware of? Some say 50, maybe 100 years ahead. What do you think?
I mean, it's always difficult to say on that, but I mean, yeah, I think that it's probably more advanced, but I mean, also there are probably things that are underplayed to the general public that we're not looking at. And specifically, I'm thinking of like psychotronic, or what we would think of in the United States as non-lethal weapons.
Right.
You know, you started to see some more rumblings about that with Havana syndrome in recent years. But this is actually something that's a big part of the book as well that I get into. But I think that a lot of that technology has advanced much more extensively than we've been led to believe. And I think effectively we might be starting to see some of this stuff being rolled out now, potentially with the conflict in Ukraine and some of the other hotspots that are starting to unfold across the globe right now. But it is...
You think they're mostly frequency-based weapons of sorts?
Yeah. I mean, I think you're seeing a lot of the stuff with the microwave and the frequency-based weapons. I mean, a lot of this is all based on electromagnetic radiation. But this is something that I really had started to uncover looking specifically at like Stanford and SRI. I mean, this has really been ground zero going all the way back to World War II for a lot of this type of research. And it's almost never talked about at all. But I mean, Stanford has like one of the most advanced microwave labs in the entire country, probably if not the world. It's got variation on like the Large Hadron Collider there at the campus. You've got the medical center, which does a lot of crazy stuff, especially related to neuroscience. So, which is another big component of this, effectively seeing how brainwaves can be influenced by some of these different frequencies and so forth. So I think that this is another aspect of a lot of the research that I've been chronicling in this book that's highly significant now, and again to this day is largely being overshadowed. And it's not to say that things like AI are not also concerning, or just other aspects like deepfake technology and so forth, but it's just incredible to me when you see how, on the one hand, this sort of almost theatrical approach to psychological warfare is being used in conjunction with a lot of this technology. I mean, I'm kind of thinking of Wagner, for instance, the Russian PMC, and how, lately they've, created this whole mystery as to whether or not Prigozhin is dead or alive. You have the videos coming out purporting to show that he's still out there.